morning. I'm Jane Tanquist. I'm the head of the family team at Myerson, and I'm talking this morning to Lindsay George, who is a therapist in Altrincham who sees individuals and couples going through issues in relation to their marriage or relationship. And we're discussing what makes a marriage work and what makes it break down, and all the issues connected with that. So good morning, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Welcome to my family podcast. The topic this morning that we're going to discuss is about what makes a marriage work and what doesn't make it work, and what happens when people disengage from each other. And there's an overlap between what we do, because I, as a divorce lawyer, see people who are going through marriage difficulties all the time. And you, as a psychotherapist, also see individuals and couples who are going through marriage difficulties. But I was wondering, Lindsay, in your opinion, as a generalism, what do you think makes a marriage work?
I would say good communication. Actually, it's more than that, clearly, because it's more about commitment and about compromise and about communication, the 3 C's, as I call them. So you probably see this, I guess, in your work as well, Jane, that when you've got clients that can communicate in an open way, the process of separation and divorce from your perspective probably happens more smoothly than if there is a closed-minded way of communication, which has been part of why the marriage has broken down in the first place. So communication is about listening, isn't it? It's about having that open and honest conversation and being able to see it from somebody else's perspective.
And I suppose also you have an issue with listening and hearing, don't you? With active listening, really listening, which is hard work, and also just shutting down and, people rolling their eyes and thinking, oh, she's banging on about this old thing again. And it's quite different. Sometimes there's just a shutdown when you're trying to communicate.
That's right. It's really important, of course, to be heard in a conversation and to be open-minded to the other person's version of how they see things. So it's a different perspective. So I guess that's the sort of compromise, in being willing to be able to see it from somebody else's perspective and be open-minded with a view to potentially changing your own perspective.
Well, yes. And what causes couples to disengage from each other over a period of time, do you think?
So many reasons, reasons. And I guess the communication breakdown is probably the highlight, really, which is where couples can potentially disengage from one another because they just stop hearing each other, or they stop talking with one another because they don't feel heard, or they don't feel respected. They don't feel that the other person values them. So that creates a potential for emotional disconnection when essentially that communication is just no longer respected or respectful to one another. There are lots of other reasons why couples disengage or relationships break down. For instance, financial issues can cause stress and strain on a relationship, and that can create betrayal or feelings of mistrust. Life situations, for instance, new children, new babies, when a couple decide to have children, that causes stress on the relationship, and the dynamic of the relationship changes. So that can create stress and strain and feeling not respected or valued. It can create distance between the couple because they don't have as much time together, and they obviously are not talking about the same things, and they may feel ignored. And that obviously can have a consequence on the finances, and then the lack of intimacy, which is another big reason why couples disengage from one another. And intimacy can be all sorts of things. It's not just about sex and sex life. It's about holding hands, and about wanting to spend time with one another, and about wanting to do things for each other in a way that is about that person being the important person in your life. When it stops being like that, then lack of intimacy is something that really manifests itself in a relationship. And that can lead to all sorts of feelings of resentment, or feeling unsupported or not seen. And again, that can impact how we communicate with one another.
And I suppose social media hasn't helped, because lots of people scroll through their phone, don't they, in the evening,
Yes.
and are more available to online communication than communication with the person that they're sitting next to on the sofa, maybe. That's
right. That's
yeah.
right. I hear this a lot in my therapy room. You're always on your phone. You're not interested in me. We don't talk anymore. And this is all part of our busy media lives, which is to be constantly available to others and to be available to to each other.
Yeah.
We use these social media as a form of escape, because what we're trying to do essentially is disengage. And
Yes.
disengaging, we are not only disengaging from the world, but we're disengaging from our partners and from our family. And so we often feel that, that's a sort of more important part of their lives than perhaps the person that sat opposite them on the sofa.
I suppose, Lindsay, one of the main reasons why marriages and relationships break down is a difficulty in communication with each other. And I noticed through my role that people have different ways of communicating with each other, don't they? Sometimes if people are quite shouty or aggressive or demanding in terms of how they communicate, it can be quite off-putting. And I suppose someone might sort of block out that aggression, might they? Or so. But in therapy sessions with couples, how can you, as a psychotherapist, help couples through their difficulties?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jane. I guess it's the nuance of communication, is that we talk about good communication and bad communication, but actually what does good communication look like and what does bad communication look like? And actually the nuances are around pitch, tone, intention. The shouty kind of person often is intimidating, and it can often be that means the partner often closes down or feels angry towards their partner for shouting in the first place, and that can create emotional withdrawal and detachment in a relationship. So that's kind of a toxic way of communicating, isn't it, when we haven't learned the skills to be able to discuss. So that's definitely where therapy can assist couples, because ultimately what couples can learn from therapy is not only around sort of self-awareness, because this might be a blind spot for somebody to realise that actually when they shout, their partner feels angry or feels upset or terrified or intimidated, and actually that blind spot will come out in the therapy room. Because one of the things that a therapist will do is, when they're working with couples, is they'll see the dynamic within the couple's relationship and where the potential is for conflict to arise or for withdrawal of the relationship, and how that potentially plays out. So it's really interesting watching people in the therapy room, how they actually communicate with one another. And a therapist will often intervene with that in obviously hopefully a safe and supportive way, to be able to point out that might not necessarily be helpful in relation to resolving a conflict or to develop better communication skills. So it's about trying to offer constructive direction in a way, not criticism, but more around direction in relation to how potentially they could communicate differently with one another.
And I suppose the benefits of counselling are dependent on a person's ability to self-reflect, as well as analyse what's going on in their relationship, but to self-reflect on how they're coming across, and maybe they're stuck in a communication channel that's not effective. It's not, it can be quite, if you get somebody who's saying you're always doing this, and and someone always feels that they're right and the other person's wrong, that can itself be quite toxic.
Very much so. So again, this is where therapy can help enormously, because it can identify these patterns that help obviously contribute to conflict and ultimately look at trying to repair the relationship or facilitating a smoother separation if that's what they've actually decided they want to do. But ultimately, reflection is part of the process in therapy. So the hour in the therapy room is super important for learning and listening and hearing each other and having that mediation from the therapist, which is about direction and how those little example nuances play out. But the real work actually happens when the clients leave the therapy room. It's the 167 hours that's outside before you come back to your next session that's the important bit. And what gets way often is we all repeat patterns as humans. We all keep doing the same thing over and over again. And having to learn new skills is often what happens in the therapy room, which is, okay, I remember the therapist told me, actually, I mustn't do this because actually it's not helpful. It puts the barriers up for my partner. It doesn't resolve the situation. I feel terrible afterwards. Okay, what was the thing that I needed to do? Yes. And those simple tools that potentially then can change that person's behaviour has an enormous effect on their partner because they see that they're trying and they then start to become more supportive of one another in their endeavour to try and repair this.
Do you find some couples come to you periodically as a sort of like a marriage or relationship MOT just to keep their relationship on track rather than, aiming, if you don't do this, I'm going to leave you?
Yes, I do. That's a really good question. Yes, very much so. Couples that used to come initially that would say, we're not even married, but we want to make sure that actually we've got some fundamental parts of our relationship ironed out before we decide we're going to get married and actually have children. I remember thinking, gosh, this is really, really smart. So I have seen much more of that in recent years.
I suppose it's interesting. For example, do you want a child or not? And people might have different expectations surrounding that.
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to other things as well. If one person earns more than the other, then do they lose respect for the other person because they are no longer valuing them in the way that they are now feeling like the provider for the family or the couple? And it's all of these little under the radar stuff that comes up in their self-awareness and having these really open conversations with somebody that allows this safe space for them to do that and guide through it in a way that doesn't feel like one answer is right and one answer is wrong, because this is a discussion, isn't it? It's not about getting it right or wrong.
Yeah. So in the unfortunate circumstance where a relationship is at an end, how can you help individuals through the separation process because I find it quite helpful to have a therapist in the background when I'm dealing with someone's relationship breakdown or marriage breakdown with them, because sometimes quite often they're very, very upset or angry, have all sorts of feelings. And I quite often recommend that they go to therapy. And I find it much easier to deal with the legal aspects of the divorce with somebody who can give me well-considered instructions without being caught in an emotional backstop, really.
Yeah, so I'm really pleased that you feel like that, because when couples come to a solicitor, a family solicitor like yourself, they really are quite terrified at times, and they feel very overwhelmed with the process of divorce. And because there's so many emotions involved with a relationship breakdown, it's rather like grief in relation to losing a person and losing a lifestyle, losing a family. The whole process of having to change your whole life because the problem being is that the relationship hasn't worked out. So therapy is a really important aspect when a relationship breaks down, because it provides that space, that really safe and non-biased space to be able to process these difficult emotions and obviously hope to improve the communication and help to work through the conflict that comes up as a result of all these really big emotions that come about when one person decides to leave a relationship, or indeed if both parties decide to end a relationship, then obviously there's a completely different scenario. But ultimately, the therapist is an ideal place to be able to offer support for either parties or both parties to either be able to facilitate a smoother separation, or find a way to be able to communicate better so that they can deal with the difficult and really awkward and uncomfortable process of divorce.
Because, for the person who wants to leave the marriage, there's the should I, shouldn't I? It must be like standing on the top of a cliff, and whether you're throwing yourself into the great unknown, and are you making the right decision or not? There must be a great deal of doubt around whether you're doing the right thing. And then for the person on the receiving end of that information, it must be terribly difficult also, because they're having to, the biggest decision of their lives is being made by somebody else, not by them. And having to the decision to leave a marriage might have been made, or a relationship might have been made by their partner several months or several years before now, and there's sort of like a catching up process. And it's very difficult for the person who's left behind as well to deal with that. And I think therapy is really a fantastic forum to be able to assist both individuals in coming to terms with the changes as a result of a breakdown of a relationship.
I guess what you touched on there is that actually there's a lack of control for one party, the feeling of it being done to them puts them in a much more vulnerable position, and the other person might have made the decision months before and has further down in their grief process, so is actually in a stage of feeling more in control and having mental clarity, whereas the partner that's been perhaps ambushed or blindsided by this huge decision may well feel very shocked and still in a state of denial about it. So again, a therapist will be able to help support that person to be able to not only work through these difficult emotions, but also to try and come to terms with what's actually happening so that they can engage in the divorce process. As you say, you find it much easier when somebody's got therapeutic support behind them to be able to navigate the divorce process with the clients. And it's incredibly difficult because it's a huge life-changing decision to be made, and there are so many other things to consider within the separation or the divorce, because I guess if there's children involved or there is finances that potentially need to be agreed upon, and then lifestyle changes, then one person might feel very out of control with all of that. And again, this is where therapy can be really helpful in helping them navigate those really big subjects of how best to work with those situations and help guide them, which again it means I have to be very much involved in what is actually happening in the legal world, which is why I read your monthly updates and get lots of information from solicitor friends about what's happening in the legal world and what's actually current, because things change all the time.
I find though, and I understand why this happens, but I find that quite a lot of people going through relationship breakdowns rely on their family and friends for support and guidance rather than going to therapy. And I understand the reason is maybe financially driven, but sometimes one's family are sort of quite unilateral in terms of their approach and can be quite divisive. And sometimes it's not really helpful to sort of have people telling you what you want to hear all the time, but it may be helpful to have a safe space to go to a therapist and just sort of get help with the emotions that you're going through as an individual, and to be able to work that through so that ultimately you're able to cope and feel better about yourself and the direction your life is going in.
I totally agree. Obviously, we have biases, and as family members, we would always want to support our family and make them feel that they were right and that they're well supported. And that's one of the things that clearly is encouraged, that they have a good support system in place, because it makes the whole process so much easier to navigate when you've got good support and family, friends, network. But the problem is we all have agendas, and we all want to make our family and friends feel that they're right and that they're well supported. But as a result, we can often create, a sense of bias in relation to how they then perceive their partner that they're estranged from, because it can cause lots of mistrust and resentment, and that can add to the strain and stress of the process of divorce and separation. So I guess this is where therapy can add an additional level of support, which is clearly, it comes from an unbiased place. There is no agenda there from the therapists, that they ultimately use incredibly, skillful therapeutic processes in order for them not to do any harm. Because when somebody's going through a divorce, they're vulnerable. And one of the huge sort of code of conducts that therapists need to use is that we use a non-maleficence process, which is do no harm to that client. And the due diligence is all about their vulnerability and the safeguarding of that person. So there will be a feeling of vulnerability and distress, but clearly it's trying to create clarity and control, not colluding with the client and saying, yes, your ex is a terrible person. This is about it from a much more balanced perspective. And actually, these two people had a relationship at one stage, and they loved each other clearly enough to get married and perhaps had children together. And what has broken down obviously can't be, retrieved again, but they can see each other in a more collaborative way, as opposed to being enemies, which is often one of the byproducts of divorce, because it's so messy and emotionally charged.
But I suppose lots of couples have children, and they have to be sort of co-parent in a constructive way in the interest of the children, really, for many years, for the rest of their lives probably. So it's best that they try and take steps to make that relationship as good as they possibly can over time. So what helps individuals going through separation and divorce?
As I said earlier, family and friends are hugely helpful in relation to feeling supported. And ultimately, that support network is invaluable for the person in relation to them developing those coping mechanisms which allow them to see what this new life looks like and to feel that they've got some direction. If they don't want to, reconcile with their partners, then they're having to look at their lives in a different way. And their family and friends can be hugely supportive in trying to guide and steer them and distract them as well. Because obviously that sort of sense of life in the way that they used to live their life has completely changed, because their roles are completely different, and they're having to be a single person again, perhaps a single parent again. And so that's when friends and family can be really helpful in sharing some of the burden. I think other things that are really helpful are around self-care. And I talk a lot about self-care because particularly women often see putting themselves first as being selfish, but I try to instill this perspective, which is actually you're no good to anybody, especially yourself, if you're not looking after yourself, because nobody looks after you. So you have to look after yourself in a way that you prioritize self-care. So taking time for simple things like trying to relax or engage in activities or exercise or, healthy habits around maybe sleep, the basics. It's good sleep, trying to eat regular meals. That's if it's not too much to think about how they spend some of their social time now. Do they look to try and, do something that's going to bring some pleasure in their lives, like, a new activity with friends, so that they can reconnect with themselves. The other things that are really important, Jane, and I don't know whether you talk about this with your clients, but it's around boundaries. So one of the difficult things with people separating and divorce is how do they establish new boundaries with one another? And again, this is all part of the sort of things that I would go through with clients in relation to setting new boundaries explicitly with their partners, so that they each know what's right, what's wrong, what's okay, what's not okay, so that it doesn't put them in compromised situations with one another.
Yes, yeah, because I find that, there's a transitioning from being a couple to living separately, and use of joint accounts and going into each other's houses and having keys to each other's properties, and that's not helpful. And it sometimes it takes a while to adjust, really, but that's a difficult period. And I often come across people who are just really anxious and not sleeping and depressed, and sometimes they need medication, sometimes they need to go and get some help from the doctor, and that's really normal. And sometimes I think people think, oh, what's the matter with me? I'm I feel really down about this, and there's something wrong with me, and they can internalize it, and sometimes medication can help for a while, but it's really important to be able to get a good night's sleep, and for many people that's very difficult when you're going through a divorce or a separation.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I trained as a nurse in my 20s. I can't help but look at that holistic way approach, which is clearly if somebody needs medication because their stress levels are so high, they're not sleeping, not fundamentally getting the nourishment they want from food, that they need from food, then something's got to give. And clearly the problem being is that it affects our hormones and our serotonin and dopamine levels. They're our happy hormones that keep us afloat and being able to deal with everyday life. And it's big life changing things that can happen, like separation and divorce, have a massive impact on our health and well-being.
Yes. Yeah.
And our physical health starts to deteriorate, and clearly once that happens, if that was the case, we'd go to the GP and we would get something to help us get better. With mental health, it's harder to spot because we start to adjust to these horrible feelings, and we start to take them as, okay, well, it's just because I'm feeling, I'm going through this experience, and they accept it. But actually some people can become very depressed, and they can feel quite paralyzed with, making decisions. I'm a massive advocate of trying to guide clients through, whatever it is that they need at that particular time, get them through this process to the other side, because part of it is looking at the future, isn't it? What helps is looking at your future self and avoid, rushing through the whole process, because as much as we all want the other side, actually there's a whole process to go through.
I, as a divorce lawyer, I sort of like leave people at the end of their divorce or at the end of their separation agreement, and I don't see them after that, and I often wonder, how they are in the future. Do you think that there are any obstacles to recovery from a divorce for some people? Do you think some people find it very difficult ever to get over a relationship breakdown?
Yes, I do. I often see people after divorce, actually, and for a period of time, and that can go on for months, even years, if they're struggling with coming to terms with what that new life looks like and feels like, and how they manage to navigate it. So the types of things that I work with are around prolonged grief, where somebody just feels very stuck and hasn't got over the hurt and the pain and the adjustments of the divorce. Some people can feel very angry and resentful to their ex-partners and can get stuck in that anger phase of grief, where they just can't tolerate even speaking about their partner. And yet, of course, if they've got children, they have to engage with, with communicating with them. And of course, that potentially can have an effect on the children and how the children feel around that parent. So the emotional pain of a relationship breakdown can be so intense and long lasting that often therapy is their only chance, really, of recovery. And that's important, because to recognize that they can have an alternative, and that actually that fear, that sense of failure that they feel, or that sense of anger towards their previous partner, can actually be overcome through working through these really big emotions.
Yeah.
Also, that trust element, the big situation when somebody's been hurt in a relationship, they often don't trust the potential of starting a new relationship, or are very wary of it, or are very down on the thought of it, because they feel that they become very generalistic in their viewpoints and say, I never want to be in another relationship again. Surprisingly, men are very quick. There's a statistics here, but 76% of men following divorce often end up in a new relationship within 6 months. Whereas,
Wow.
yes, and with women, it's over 2 years generally.
Gosh.
And that's a generalisation, yes.
Those are interesting statistics, yes. Well, thank you very much for coming along and talking to me this morning about a subject that I'm sure many people would be interested in. I think you're doing a wonderful job with couples in our area and with individuals. And I'd encourage anyone who is having personal problems related to marriage or relationships, or just anything, to have some therapy, and I think that might help. So thank you very much, Lindsay.
You're very welcome. Anytime.